Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Revolution Recap. We have a very special midweek episode for you today. We have an interview with Brad Feldman, the voice of the Rebs. We talk a little bit about his career, how he ended up with the Revolution, got his thoughts on this year's team. We talked about Paul Mariner a little bit at the end. It's a very good interview all the way through. I did want to add really quickly at the beginning of this episode that we talk a little bit about Bruce Arena and his handling of the media, and we recorded this on Tuesday, and this is being released Thursday, and that is a little bit significant because for those that don't know, there was a press conference on Wednesday that got a little contentious between Bruce Arena and the media. The media asked a few questions about Carles Gil's injury, and Bruce reiterated that the press conference was for the upcoming game against Toronto FC, and then left shortly thereafter, clearly annoyed with the media. So that was an incident that happened after this interview. So when you hear the parts about Bruce Arena, just know that we are not ignoring it or dancing around it or referring to it in any sort of way, and that the interview happened well before that press conference that happened on Wednesday. And before we get into the Brad Feldman interview, I wanted to ask you guys if you could please rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you are listening. Reviews are always appreciated. Make sure you follow us at Revolution Recap on Twitter for the latest updates, and also make sure you're following us on Instagram for our Revolution Recap Instagram page, and also check out our Revolution Recap Facebook page as well. And also please support our sponsor Golasso Kits at Golasso Kits on Twitter and Golasso Kits on Instagram. I know they had another unveiling today, so please go check that out. And don't forget, if you go to GolassoKits.com and find something that you like, please make sure you use discount code REVSRECAP for 15% off your order. Now, with all that being said, Brad Feldman.
Today, we welcome to the show Brad Feldman. You probably know him as the voice of the New England Revolution, doing play-by-play on the Revolution broadcast. If you've been following the team for a while, you may also be familiar with the online programs he's hosted in the net, Revs Rap, more recently Outside the Booth. And if you go even further back, you may have heard him on the radio broadcast back when those actually were separate from the TV broadcast audios. What you probably didn't know is back in the early days, Brad also had a number of other hats for the Revolution simultaneously, including handling media relationships. In fact, Brad was doing that back when Revolution Recap first launched as a radio show in 2005 and was a huge part of our ability to have some early success by getting us guests from the team nearly every week and coming on himself when he couldn't get us a guest. If memory serves, Brad actually is the reason we're named Revolution Recap. I believe I had sent him some suggested names that were too close to what the team was using, and he sent us back Revolution Recap as an option that we ended up going with. So with that, Brad, thanks for all your help over the years, and thanks for joining us again today.
Hey, it's good to talk to you guys. Sean, it's been a while. Greg, good to talk to you. And I will, if Revolution Recap has brought you success, then I will take full credit for it. I don't remember that story, but that's a long time ago now. So it's good to hear you guys mention things that I did back in the day, because all of a sudden it's been a few minutes since, 2005.
Yeah, and to me, it feels like you've been with the Rebels since the beginning, but you actually got your first taste of MLS as a sideline reporter with the Dallas Burn, I believe, and then Kansas City Wizards. Tell us kind of what led you to the Revolution, what your path was to get here.
Well, I was born in New England and for the most part grew up in the Boston area. So when my wife Liz and I had our daughter, and even before that, our compass was always pointed, northeast back to the Boston area. I got into MLS TV, as you say, when I was down in the Dallas area. Actually, my first on-air job was in a very small market, Sherman Denison in North Texas, just south of Oklahoma line, the Red River, Lake Texoma area. And just through serendipity and, having some good friends, I got connected with some of the Dallas Burn players. In particular, Brandon Pollard. This has been documented elsewhere, but Brandon Pollard really is my sort of soccer guiding light guru. Like, he's out of the game now for the most part, but what he did for me put me on a track, and I'll give credit whenever I get the chance. He introduced me to Ken Neal, who's the coordinating producer, executive producer for a number of teams now, including Real Salt Lake and Nashville. He consults with Minnesota, Dallas. He's got his hands in a lot of pots, but he was also a player agent in the early years of the league and in the old USISL. And Brandon Pollard and his roommates include Temoc Suarez, Richard Farah, old Dallas Burn guys. They sent my tape to Ken Neal. My tape being a VHS cassette of me anchoring the Friday night sportscast on a local station that mostly covered Southeast Oklahoma and some of the area north of Dallas. And they told him, because I'd gone to see a World Cup game with them at a Irish bar in 1998, and they told him that I was really into soccer, and I, had a clue about what was going on in the field. And so Ken gave me the opportunity to do sideline. It wasn't for Dallas Burn games. It was actually just for Kansas City Wizards. I covered the Burn for that station, and I got a lot of heat for it because the general manager was like, a lot of people around here like soccer, bub, and it was like, well, none of your football head friends do, but I'm not playing in the leagues, where there are, like the enthusiasm for soccer with the, both the, the Mexican American and Salvadoran communities, and then the high school kids who a lot of them went on to play for local NAIA and Division II schools. Like there was like this whole culture that the mainstream didn't even know about. And so I was showing Dallas Burn highlights, and those guys appreciated it. And we were the same age as the players then. So my wife and I, we became friends with them. Anyway, to answer your question, I did just a handful of games. And then when I was back in the Northeast, if Kansas City came up north and I was around, Ken would put me on. But it's literally, it's like 4 games I did, but it was enough to build a demo tape. And while I was doing it, I got the direct kick package and I started really watching. I was like, well, some of these guys really know what they're doing. Like obviously there were some really good announcers in the league from the outset, Derek Ray here in New England, people like that. But then in some of the regional markets, I was like, this guy doesn't know where the ball stuffed or inflated. And it occurred to me that there's just an opportunity. I was really into MLS. I was really into world soccer. And I already had a toehold because that was a big break for me, right? To be able to do sideline for an MLS game relative to doing I was doing Friday Night Lights football in Texas, which is a great way to cut your teeth. But when you're doing like single A and double A, Tom Bean against Van Alstyne or whatever, there are more people on the field than in the stands. You know what I mean? And so it was a step up. So what I did is I used all my free time, and I made sure to keep, in touch with people like Jürgen Menke in New England and John Nevis with the Metro Stars, the other communications and PR directors around the league. And those guys, you couldn't do it now. Those guys would give me, if I really leaned on the horn, an empty broadcast booth. And I go with the digital voice recorder. I prepare as if I was getting paid to do the game. If they didn't have a booth for me, I'd sit in the stands. I can tell you, like, I probably did a half dozen U.S. Open Cup games, like the Wilmington Hammerheads against the Dallas Burn, things like that, where I was just looking for a minute and 30 seconds of good tape out of 90 minutes. And I built an audio demo. I went to the MLS Cup event in D.C. in 2000, that great 1-0 game between the Kansas City Wizards and who did they beat? Can't even remember.
Yeah, I'm blanking myself.
Oh yeah, no, Tony Miola was the hero in that, right? And who was the Danish guy who scored the goal?
Was that
anyway,
Miklos Milnar, or probably botching the name?
Milnar. That was it. That was good. That was very good. Yeah. So and Johan Cruyff was in the media scrum and everything. It was great. And I went to the GM's meetings and team, like the COB meetings. I just sat outside. Like how brazen is that? Again, you couldn't pull it off now. You'd be escorted out, in handcuffs. But I was just like, I want this. I broke down the door, and I just was past. I was throwing around these audio demos on CDs like Ninja Stars. And I knew that 95% of them would end up in the bottom of people's briefcases or the bottom of a trash can on short order, never to be listened to. But the Revolution people, including Sunil, held on to it. And then I just started bugging them. And people like Derek A-Frame and Lou Imbriano, I just broke down the door. And I got a call back from, Gary Grodecki too. Those 3 guys, collectively kind of gave me a chance. And, I left voicemails for like Dan Kraft. I didn't realize he wasn't involved in the Revolution. I knew Dan from 30 years ago. And I got a call back and said, we'll give you an opportunity, if you want to do 1 day a week with Adrian Healy. Remember, they were doing in the net 5 days a week. And one day it would be Adrian with Derek. One day it would be Adrian with Seamus. One day it would be Adrian with Meter Perel. One day it would be Adrian with Doug Chapman. One day it would be Adrian with me. And it was sort of a rotating thing. But a lot of those guys are doing a lot of their freelance stuff, had other jobs, whatever. And so okay, well, we need you on Tuesday as well as Friday. So I started showing up for that. It's like, well, hey, can I get on the games? Look, actually, we're full up, but there may be some conflicts. And so then, Meter Perel would have or Derek would have a conflict. Meter would move up into the booth. That meant that Adrian was doing play-by-play on radio instead of color on TV, and then I'd move into color on radio. Or Adrian moved to play-by-play on TV, and I moved to play-by-play on radio. Mike Noonan would move into color. I did games with Butch Stearns, Mike Noonan, and then I got like a handful of games that year, 2001, on sideline for TV on WLVI channel 56, and also Fox Sports New England. And then the next year they hired me full-time, not full-time, but they hired me to be the regular analyst on radio with Meter Perel. I was like, I'm not really an analyst, but I took it. And then the next year they made me the analyst on TV again. Like I never played or coached professionally, but I wasn't going to say no. And then Jurgen Menke left and they needed a director of communications. And that's when I went full-time in like May of that season, 2003. So that's a long-winded answer, but that's how I got here.
No, that's great. And one of the things that I remember reading, and I think was an interview about you, Steve Nicol actually said that you actually helped play a part in the Revs game preparation back then. Could you talk about what you did to help kind of on that end, which I think is, not something that people, would have expected in your role or know about you, and if that's been the case with other coaches, or if that was kind of a Steve Nicol thing?
Okay, I want to say this in a way that's neither overly flattering to myself or in any way insulting to Steve and the now departed Paul Mariner. My main skill in that situation was the ability to turn on a computer and launch an app. Like that made me a technical expert for that particular staff at that particular time. I'd get a call, I'd be like, they call me Machine. They'd be like, hey, Machine, we're doing the corners. I was like, great. How do they look? How's Chicago marking up? Zone, man, like, how are they doing it? It's like, well, we don't know because we can't get the match analysis going. We've got, we got a couple beers up here. You want to come do the corners with us? I was like, all right. So but this happened all the time. It would be like, okay, because usually, you had the team meal, then I go off and do my stuff, and they say, okay, we'll see you later. I meet up with them late. But then it started to be like, okay, meet us after dinner, and I go and I'd set them up because for my game preparation, I used Match Analysis, which doesn't exist anymore. It was a terrific product for the time. It's very similar to like what you have with Y Scout and Instat, less developed, but focused on MLS. And so like I could click through the screens and stuff like that much more quickly than them. They do all the preparation. Once they saw it, they were whizzes, but it was getting the thing going that, and I don't have any real IT background. I was just, sometimes it was just like, oh yeah, the adapter's not plugged into the computer. That's why you can't turn on the computer. It was nothing more sophisticated than that. I hardly, every once in a while, I think they'd ask my opinion on somebody, to humor me. Like, they're like, what, I remember when they were looking at Parkhurst and Riley, they're like, what do you think? And also Mansali and Nyasi, they asked me if, they'd say, hey, you should watch Gambia and U20s kind of thing. What do you think? I said the wingers were flying. I was, yeah, but they didn't make any decisions based on what I said, believe me. But, yeah, like, I don't want like that. I don't mean to burst the myth, but now I will say that being able to hang around with those guys like that, you picked up stuff by osmosis, and I learned their slang, their parlance. It took a while, to learn the way they spoke about the game. But what was really important is to learn to just sort of absorb that, so then you could really drill down on what they were saying, even the asides, the little comments. They were nice enough to let me sit on the bench for multiple reserve games back in those years, almost as if I was one of the staff. Now, they never asked me about a sub or a tactical switch, but I listened to them discuss all those things. And I think that was a really big part of my soccer education. So what I would say is they helped me a lot more than I helped them. And I was honored to but we had a lot of fun too. Like some of the stories from those reserve games, like, Park City, where there is like the fans got so mad And then we had Jeff Walker guarding Seth, marking Seth Tremblay, and Jeff was one of the nicest guys in the world. He's head of school, principal and administrator, bright guy, went to Brown. It was in Olympic shape, and he ran Seth Tremblay, who was trying to get back into the first team for ourselves, into the ground, and it really made the locals angry. And so they were like, start the bus, because we thought they were going to have angry mob with pitchforks and torches after us. Another time they left me stranded on Michigan Avenue. I had to hitchhike because they thought it was just funny. I was a minute late for the bus at 9 a.m. and they took off on me. I was banging on the side of the bus, and they were going to eventually open the door, but I was like, screw these guys. And I jumped in with an agent who was following the bus. Things like that, but like all that stuff, I doubt it goes on. They used to say at the time, they used to say, hey, you think Bobby Gansler's group's having as much fun as we are? Like those days, you could never recreate it. But no, I was not one of the tactical minds during the Steve Nickel era. That I want to dispel that.
No, that's great. It is the era back then is a fun one to talk about. We've had a few of those guys on our show over the past year, and there's always some fascinating stories from back when Steve Nickel was coach. Jumping forward to Jay Heaps, you worked with him in the booth for a while before he became head coach. What was that like? Was that kind of a weird experience for you, kind of going from him being your color commentator to then kind of broadcasting with him as the head coach?
Yeah, I do. It was a little bit weird. I was really happy for him, and I was happy for him to use that job as sort of a springboard to get into coaching, because he was very quick to say that it was during those years when he was watching the game in a more analytical way from a bird's eye view that he started to think about coaching. Because, he was at Morgan Stanley, did their whole training program. It was on the Wall Street side, could have stayed with that very easily. But, the work that he put in to do the games, and those are a tough couple of years. That was maybe the sort of the low point of the Revs, the sort of the very end of the Steve Nickel era were just not good years. But I think it gave Jay a good way to look at stuff. He would get on the match analysis, talk stuff through. It was a little weird when, you remember there were a couple of tense exchanges with him and his former teammate, Jeff Causey, on the air. You see with Bruce, you saw with Steve, when your job depends on the results on the field, having a couple of happy-go-lucky TV announcers saying, so how'd the first half go? Like, that's not what you want to do when you have to go talk to your team at halftime. And, people, sort of make fun of, I know on Sports Hub they've been sort of reenacting our interviews with Bruce, but I give him credit just for doing it. And that's where it could get a little bit tetchy with Jay too, is just right after the game or coming off at halftime for the interview. But overall, Jay's a fiery guy, a very competitive guy. And that's, we had a sort of, I wouldn't say love-hate, but sort of a two-sided relationship when he was a player. Most of the time it was good, but he and I could both tell you about some fairly memorable spats we had when I was the media relations director and he was, one of the star players, and I was trying to get him to do stuff when he had other things going on, and we would go at it. Same thing happened. We didn't go at it as much when we were TV partners, but then I think, under the pressure of the heat of battle, sometimes things were, sort of went off the rails, but they always came back. So that's just pro ball. People are playing for their dinner. So a lot of respect for Jay. And I think it was good for me to see his progression. And I like seeing him have success down in Birmingham. And I do expect him to see him back in MLS one day.
And kind of along the same lines of that role change, do you feel there's an adjustment period when a player steps into the booth and becomes a color commentator where now they're going from being teammates with these guys to having to analyze their play?
I think it's an adjustment for anybody coming to the booth with me, being used to other people letting them talk, and then I don't let them say anything. No, I listen. I think inevitably there's an adjustment period. Maybe I'm giving away trade secrets, but Jay Heaps, after his first live TV open, and it wasn't even live, it was Look Live taped. But he's like, holy smokes, Brad. He's like, are we done? He's like, he's like, I played Duke basketball. He's like, I played in MLS Cup Finals. That was the quickest thing it comes at you thick and fast. And that's true. Same that, but I didn't play pro sports, but I felt the same way when I first started doing live TV. It feels like real time accelerates. And, that's because you have people talking in your ear. The elements come quicker on screen than you expect them to. And it's only through experience. Very few people are prepared out of the gate. And it doesn't mean you can't do it. I think a lot of ex-players, if they're doing punditry, if they're doing analysis on the desk, it's like, okay, when you talk about what you know about, then you can be sort of poised and analyze things in a more expansive, long-form way. But when you're doing either a highlight show or especially a live game where you don't know what's coming next, or it's a very, very tight, like we only have 8 minutes before kickoff, and 3 of those are commercial breaks. So, it's a very short time. And so I think that it's just adapting to that. Nobody who we've recruited to do that ever, I think, didn't have the ability to get up to speed and to do it well, and there are ranges, people, in terms of their game knowledge, their ability to communicate, their ability to synthesize information on the fly, to deal with the outside distractions, like, a third monitor where the graphics are that's not the air, producer and a director talking in your ear, things like that, because that's the thing, you're multitasking, and neuroscientists will tell you can't multitask, but you have to be able to change your focus very quickly and then snap back. So there's an adjustment period, no doubt, but it goes beyond just sort of like what the viewer at home is hearing. And I give a lot of leeway to people as they're learning to do it, because I know that, you can see people have a trajectory that's very steep, because, at first you're just dealing with all the outside elements, you know what I mean? And even if you have a producer who says, block that all out, just talk, we'll tell you when you've gone on too long, there's still more distractions and more things to think about at once than most people realize before they start doing TV. But I'm not saying it's the hardest job in the world. It's not like being a neuroscientist, but it's a particular combination of skills. And so, yeah, obviously, and I think, like you see with Charlie, like Charlie was good out of the gate, but he's a much more mature analyst than he was 2 years ago, because he's doing everything. He's doing, MLSsoccer.com and Extra Time, and I used to replay all those shows. He's doing the US Soccer, he's doing Sirius, he's doing CBS, as well as our broadcast. And those reps are how you get good, because he already has the ideas in his head. He already sees the game in the way that you want him to. And I think that's evolving and maturing too. But, guys play professionally for over a decade is going to have the knowledge, and then it's learning to communicate it within the medium that you're working in. And that's, it's like anything, it's just doing it. You got to keep doing it. And, it's like developing a first touch, just got to do it a million times.
And I got to go back and ask you about those halftime interviews with Bruce Arena. I know you and Charlie joke a bit about him on the broadcast, and you mentioned on the 98.5 interviews. Is he the most unpredictable coach you've dealt with as far as what you're going to get from him in those halftime comments?
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, like what I would say is there are times where I'm maybe a bit apprehensive, like, oh, that didn't go well, and he'll probably be very curt, and then just rip off the headset. And then it's almost as if he wants to vent. He's like, no, we're gonna warm up Matt Polster and bring him on at halftime. Maybe go to a 3-5. He'll tell you everything that you would never have dare to ask. And then sometimes the team's up 3-0. He's like, well, you have to be happy about that. I'm not happy about it at all. So yeah, in that respect, it's unpredictable, but that makes for good TV. And I don't talk to Bruce that often away from work, but I don't think there's any malicious intent. I don't think he's trying to embarrass us. I think he's just in the moment, and I give him credit for doing it, because it's one of the obligations of the job. But as I said earlier, it's not necessarily one that any coach relishes. So I have no issue with how Bruce does it. And like these last 2 games, after a couple of games where he's a little more terse and curt, these last 2 games he's been more expansive. So that's just the flow of it,
Have any headsets been broken yet?
Yeah, I wish he wouldn't do that, but I'm not going to start yelling for that. That's for the audio tech. Say, hey, please hand it to me, But I'm going to leave that one alone. But I don't believe he's actually damaged any equipment, which that's started to happen. If Crash Sports and Entertainment started getting billed, he wouldn't get a bill, but he might get a note saying, hey, could you just put it down a little more gently? But I don't think that's happened yet.
No, I mean personally,
Bruce is fine. I think the vibe around Bruce, the guy wins, and so nobody's gonna say,
right.
Just keep being Bruce. If you're with the Reds, keep doing what you're doing. That's how I think people look at it.
No, I'm just from my experience as kind of outside media with Bruce Arena. I remember when I was, I don't know, maybe 16 or something at Gillette Stadium for a U.S. men's national team game in his first stint. When he was there as the head coach and going to a press conference and watching him tear apart journalists that called Landon Donovan Brandon Donovan, and kind of the classic Bruce sarcasm. I don't know if you were there for that, but I'm sure you can.
I think he's taken a little off his fastball. My favorite was when Chris Cole said, you weren't happy with the field. They say they treated it with some sort of chemical to make the grass grow more evenly. And he said, hey, Chris, why don't you go roll around in the field and test it out for us? But he's always been that way. He's a New York guy. What I would say is this. I feel like Bruce Arena has an appropriate balance of sort of edge and gentleness underneath it. And I'm not saying he's a gentle guy, but I think he knows instinctively. I don't think he would even necessarily, other than to maybe his family and his closest confidants, if at all, be able to articulate exactly what the philosophy is. I think he's just got an intrinsic and to an extent learned feel for human motivation in the context of team sports. It sounds simplistic, but he's got a knack for that few people in soccer in the U.S. have been able to come close to matching. I think it comes from his experience in lacrosse as well, his experience at Virginia, he talks about it, being around those, legendary ACC basketball coaches. But I think most of all, he's seeing what works and what doesn't work. He's had times, with his last stint with the U.S. where things ended badly, his short stint with the Red Bulls where it just didn't go great. He has that to measure against his much wider successes at Virginia, DC, his first go round with the U.S. national team, LA Galaxy. And so, Bruce, you could say, oh, he's got magic in his act, he's got a sixth sense. I think he's a very smart guy. He just doesn't overly complicate stuff. And I think having been on a road trip with the team recently for the first time in a year and a half, it was really remarkable to see how the group dynamic has continued on a positive arc. And you got to give a lot of the credit for the success to the Bruce Arena way. He doesn't do all of it himself. He has a great staff with him who they're all really good. Everybody who's been with him for a long time is a Bruce whisperer in his own way, whether it's Kurt Anolfo, Richie Williams, Dave Vandenberg. They get him, he gets them, and then they can sort of radiate, transmit what he wants, maybe in a different way than Bruce would directly. But I think they save him from having to do all the contacts, all the smaller tasks himself. So he gets to sort of orchestrate as the leader, but he's not overly dictatorial. He knows, and I'm not the first person to say it, he knows when to push and he knows when to let off. Is he 100%? No, he'll tell you that. And there are some players that there are players who are great players who are good guys who don't mess with Bruce, but Bruce also recognizes that. And the reason you see him bringing guys like an AJ De La Garza or Emmanuel Boateng is because those are guys who he knows get him, I was with Pat Noonan after the game the other night. Pat Noonan turns out is a Bruce guy, right? He just, that's why he was at the Galaxy and national team, on his coaching staff, because the rhythm of his rap sort of, syncopates, like it's not exactly the same beat, but as long as it like lines up in a good way and you're on, in the same rhythmic pattern with him, then, like the band will march to it, and Bruce's hit rate is just higher than anybody else. Like Ziggy Schmidt too, but Ziggy never did at the national team level. Ziggy never brought the U.S. to, within a missed handball call of potentially advance to, the semifinals of the World Cup. Like Bruce did. Like Bruce got it. Bruce knows what the blank he's talking about. Even when it's rough. You know what I mean? Even when it's not what you agree with. Like Bruce's opinion has credibility. The results back that up. And so like great hire. Like look at the top of the league. What can you say?
Before we get to the second half of our interview with Brad Feldman, we want to take a minute and talk about our sponsor, Golasso Kits. Golasso Kits' mission is to bring unique vintage jerseys to your home with a catalog of jerseys, jackets, scarves, and more from clubs and national teams from over 80 countries in the world. The passion for the beautiful game doesn't have borders, and neither does selection, with every corner of the planet represented. Check out GolassoKits.com for their full selection, and make sure you follow them at Golasso Kits on Twitter, and follow them on Instagram on their Golasso Kits page for updates and their new inventory. They've added some really cool Revolution merch and some really cool USA merch recently. Most notably, there are a few 1994 retro USA windbreakers that need a nice home. And there is a brand new mint condition women's jersey. I believe it's in a medium for only $30 on their website right now. And that is before the promo code Revs recap for 15% off. So there's a lot of Revolution stuff, a lot of USA stuff. And even if you have another club that you're looking to support, there's going to be something for them too. So make sure you go check them out and check out their full catalog at GolassoKits.com. And when you find something you like, please make sure you use promo code Revs recap for 15% off your order. That's GolassoKits.com with promo code Revs recap for 15% off your order. The code and links to the website are in the show notes. Before I get into the questions about the current team, though, I do have one more question about your broadcasting career, Brad. Do you have a favorite call? Like for me, I remember, the downtown Toronto line from the Michael Parkhurst goal. Is there anything that you've done and you look back and you're like, oh, that was a really good call. That's one of my finer moments as a broadcaster.
So how's this? It really bums me out that when the league pushes out the Michael Parkhurst from downtown Toronto call, that they have the Toronto home call because of the way that the satellite package is set up and what gets archived at the league, digital media center down in Florida. I understand why, but there have been a few of those. So like my goal calls in the first leg of the 2014 Eastern Conference Championship series with the Red Bulls, especially the Jermaine Jones call. Now, people in New England have heard it because, it's been integrated into TV opens and stuff like that, but it's not the call of record because it was nationally televised, right? Same thing, I'm trying to think, there's another one. Oh, yeah, the Taylor Twellman bicycle kick in 2007. Dave O'Brien had a perfectly good call, but I love being able to call that goal. And I know that we've, used it several times. We've archived that audio and synced it up with the video for Revolution regional broadcast. So it's not as if it's gone into the vortex and never to be heard again. But I'd say two of my three favorite calls, Jermaine, and, Taylor Twellman with the overhead bike, Foxborough's going nuts, and then the muskets hit right after that. I love that. Obviously the Lee win, have that Vancouver makes, top five. I also, it was a Chris Tierney goal, early regular season. I would say 2017 against Colorado. And I think I said something similar. I was like, have some of that, those are the ones that come to mind. I wasn't, I could drill down and come up with some less obvious ones, but I just love the juice of it, man. I try not to pre-script anything. I've never had a signature goal call like the excellent Dave Johnson in DC is like, it's in the net. JP Delacamera, very terse. He just says, goal, it's like the opposite of goal, it's like very American, right? It's just like, goal. And what happened. I say what comes to mind in the moment. And that's why I like doing it, man. There's nothing like a goal in soccer, right? There's nothing like it in sports. I don't want to be too self-congratulatory either. I'm not saying these are my greatest calls or that I have the greatest calls. These are just the ones that are memorable and big moments that I enjoyed. And I do wish with a couple of them that they were more widely disseminated so that when Michael Parkhurst retweets that goal, that it has the home Revolution call on it, you know? And I think the Revs actually did me right and actually pushed that version out after MLS.
I've heard it a lot recently. I think with the 25-year team and all that, I've heard that call a little bit more recently, and so that's what spurred the question. You also answered my next question of my next question of how much is pre-scripted or how much is in the moment, and I think doing it in the moment, you know, kind of captures the thrill of it. So that's a really good answer there.
Well, here's what I would say to people who are looking to do this. What I would say is never pre-script the actual lines or verbiage. What I think is really helpful is to, in a sort of more abstract way, when you're driving the stadium, if you have an abstract thought in the back of your mind, wow, Lee Nguyen would really like to score against Vancouver after they waived him. You know what I mean? If you had that storyline already in your head, then you're more likely to say something pertinent. You know, like there was no way to know that he was going to score, you know, an absolute fizz bomb on them like that, and then turn around, point to the name on the back of the jersey. You know, like that was just, you know, it was dovetailed as well as we could have ever expected it from a entertainment and storytelling standpoint. But I feel like scripting it, you have to be a real good actor for it to not come off as if it was scripted. You know, and very few people who go into sportscasting are great actors, or otherwise they would be actors.
I do want to get a couple of questions in before we have to let you go about this team, because the team is flying right now, first place in the East. Of all the teams you've covered and commented on, where do you think this year's version ranks?
Tough to compare eras. You know, I'm not the first person to say that by any means. I would say this is the best because of two major factors. One is Carlos Gil, who is unparalleled in terms of his overall skill set. You know, guys like Twellman and Dempsey and Joe Max Moore, many others who have worn the uniform, great players. But in terms of the overall ability to impact the game and the other 10 players around them, not just the results, but the way the team plays, because of him, he's making it's a short body of work compared to some of these guys I just mentioned, but it's he might be the best player the Reds have ever had in a very competitive era of MLS. Second factor is depth. There's no way to if you look, people can argue over whether the 05, 06, 07 teams were the best, the second half of 2014 with Jermaine Jones, the first half of 2008 before the Reds kind of hit a wall after the Superliga win. But none of those teams went more than, 3-4 guys on the bench deep with players that, like the big debate was like you play Wells Thompson or Andy Dorman, right, in 07, 08, right? Like that, that. But now you're talking about, guys that you can bring on, you're talking about do you play, you could say that, defensive midfield, quote unquote, because they play different systems, but that 6 and 8 position is the Revs' weakness. But at the same time, look at McNamara and Polster combining for that first goal the other day. Look at, what Maciel has done in just his first season with the first team. There's a lot of talent there. And Wilfred Kaptoum is like the fourth guy in that group, and he's in his prime and came out of the Barcelona system. Reds never had that kind of depth before. Christian Mafla behind DeJuan Jones. DeJuan Jones has made team of the week. Christian Mafla is supposed to be the starter. He's left-footed. But you've got both AJ De La Garza and Christian Mafla who can play that position, right? You bring Teal Bunbury, who looks every bit as spry as he did 5 years ago. You bring him off the bench most games. You bring Tommy McNamara, who would start for 2/3 of the team in the league every week, off the bench most weeks. None of those earlier teams had anything approaching that depth. You'd say they're incredibly 20 guys, and a guy like Damian Rivera can't get a game. So, based on those two criteria, right now, I'd say this 2021 team is the best, but there's still work to do. There's over a third of the season left, and we all know that, in the end, as much as MLS, sort of hardcore fans value the Supporter Shield, and with good reason, the ultimate measure is MLS Cup. So let's have this conversation in 4 or 5 months,
Well, I do want to talk about Matt Turner a little bit too, because he's coming off of a phenomenal Gold Cup. Where do you think, in your opinion, where do you think he is currently on the depth chart for the United States? Do you think he earned the number one starting spot?
I think if Greg Berhalter is smart, then yes, because Zach Steffen right now isn't getting a lot of games, right? So it's hard to say that Matt Turner, who's playing great in his domestic league, isn't the sharper goalkeeper, right? So I think, the wild card is Horvath, who, will always be a legend for what he did in the Nations League final, right? And there are some people, like you read Soccer America, and some people who are putting Horvath above both Turner and Zach Steffen. I think you have to wait and see how the English season goes to start with. You know what I mean? I think in terms of pure shot stopping, I was surprised to see some pundits on Twitter saying that if it went to a penalty shootout, you'd rather have Horvath than Turner. To people in New England, you're like, huh? Like Horvath, maybe he, like, I don't know his stats overseas. Maybe he is, like Nick Raimondo or something like that. But Turner's record, on penalties is unbelievable. And he has got the psychological game, as we saw against Qatar, to go with the pure shot stopping ability. And he does his homework, so he knows what the shooters can do. So, for me, in terms, when you look at the sort of points gained, expected goals versus, actual goals allowed, all those stats, and then just the eyeball test, to me, Matt Turner is the best pure shot stopper for the U.S. since, a young Tim Howard. I covered the Metro Stars when he was just breaking through before I got the Rev stuff. I was doing stuff in the New York market, 99, 2000. And as soon as I saw Matt, sort of when he came back from his USL stint, I was like, when he was like basically making saves behind his body that looked like they're going in, and he'd pull it out. I was like, the last guy I saw do that was Tim Howard. So for me, and I'm biased, you got, if you're Greg Berhalter, you got to start, at least give Turner a couple qualifiers in this next batch, see how he does. Horvath is in the conversation. I'd say Steffen is third.
I mean, you certainly have to say that Matt Turner has done everything he could to put himself into the conversation. And I think the Gold Cup couldn't have gone much better for him. So it's really exciting to see him kind of get the national credit that I think everyone regionally knows he deserves. Before we let you go, I do have to ask about Andrew Farrell. He broke the record for most games started in team history this week. There's a bit of a debate online over whether or not Andrew Farrell qualifies as a club legend. Can we get you on the record for your opinion of if you think Andrew Farrell has achieved that level of being a club legend?
Well, I don't think there's any debate. Like, I don't want to insult anybody who's on the other side of the argument, but like, what are you talking about? Are you kidding me? The guy's about to set the record for appearances. So if Diego Fagundes and Shalry Joseph are legends, and Andrew Farrell is hands down, no argument, a legend. Like, what's your criteria for being a legend? Like, what's the argument on the other side?
I think I
can't imagine what it would be.
Yeah, well, the counter argument I think is just if you compare it to, I guess the teams of the 2000s that were, going to MLS Cups and all of that, and I guess Andrew Farrell, because his era was on worse teams, I guess those minutes aren't as I don't want to say as valuable, but kind of a quality over quantity argument. I guess that's kind of the best way I can phrase it.
Well, he was on the 2020 team. He was on the 2014 team. He was on the 2016 team that went to a cup final. Like it's not like he's been a schlub. The Reds during his era have not there were some guys playing the back line those years we were talking about, 2010 through 2012. Maybe not so much when Andrew came in, things, bottomed out and we're on an upward arc. And, and if you're going to give legend status to some of these guys, like there are some guys who who I think should be a club legend who's not? Carlos Llamosa. Because when he has, he lost his spot. He's here towards the end of his playing career. Michael Parkhurst, who certainly is a club legend. But how many seasons did Mike play? 3 for the Reds?
Yeah,
right?
I don't think he hit 100 appearances. Did he? Close to it.
Right. So Farrell's, in getting the high 250s. He's been to an MLS Cup final. He's been to a U.S. Open Cup final. They were, one game away from being back in an MLS Cup. What do you want, people? Give me a break. Cal Ripken played on some terrible Orioles teams, but he's like the Iron Man of all time, right? Like there are years where Ripken played on Orioles teams that didn't win 70 games, right? So give me a break. Now I'm fired up. I think it's good to kick these things around online. Yes, Andrew Farrell is a club legend because consistency and reliability is an asset that is undervalued. All these guys play with pain and minor injuries that none of us know about, and when you're a central defender, you get more than most. And so, yeah, I'm solidly on the yes side of that argument.
Well, we got through about a third of our questions we had for you, but we're hitting end of time here. But we would be remiss if we didn't ask before we let you go about your longtime broadcast partner and former Revs assistant coach, Paul Mariner, who sadly passed away last month. It's been really telling to me to see how important he was to so many people with all the tributes across the globe. My limited experiences with him, he was a fantastic person. It was a joy talking soccer with him. How do you think Paul should be remembered by Revolution fans?
I think Noon and I were talking about it after the game. Just smiles, just laughs. That's what Stevie Nichols said. Every time you start to get down, just think of one of 1,000 funny stories or running jokes or little expressions he had, because he lived life to the fullest. He made the most of his time on Earth. He made us all better for having known him. It's a huge hole that he's gone. I can't tell you how many times during the Euros, he was still alive, but he was down to the very, very last. And, I knew I couldn't text him stuff anymore. And that's when I really started to feel the loss, because it's like England had that terrific run. And it just started to sink in that, this is going away. But, I'm fortunate of, 15 plus years of friendship and contact with the guy. And, you do realize that, and I already knew this from having traveled around with him, that he just had this, huge network of like-minded people. He collected people. They didn't all have to be English or Hard Rock fans or even football people. They just had to have the same joie de vivre and spirit of embracing life and sort of upfront honesty that were the sort of the main tenets of his credo. And that's what made him, he was just authentic. I'll tell you one thing. It was a bit of insight. Tony Husband, the Nashville SC play-by-play guy who's English, who I hadn't met before the game a couple weeks ago. And he, like a lot of people in my side of the business, I found a lot of nice comments and condolences and things like that. But he interviewed Paul in Plymouth, and I told him I'd been over when Paul was coaching at Plymouth a couple times, and it was, really remarkable to see old men stop him in the street and recounting, their great memories of him scoring goals for Plymouth Argyle in, the early mid-'70s, his first, full professional team. And he said, he framed it in a certain way, what Paul meant to people, better than I'd heard it from others, because he said that was a time in England where things are sort of on a down curve. There's all the fan violence, the economy wasn't good. The whole cool Britannia thing that happened in the mid-'90s had not taken place yet. And England was not well regarded, and kind of like the U.S. in the mid-late 70s, it felt like things were a bit broken. But Paul sort of embraced his Englishness and brought like pride and spirit to wearing the England jersey, and did it with like an unapologetic verve and vigor that really people related to. This working class kid from the northwest of England, you know, outside of Bolton. And he actually, like, I think won hearts and minds from people who were maybe more conservative in their lifestyle than he was, because you could tell he was bothered. He cared, and he played in a way and carried himself in a way that helped restore pride. You know, that sort of lucky ricochet against Hungary, but he put England back in the World Cup, qualified them in front of 100,000 in the rain at Wembley for the first time in 12 years. Like, England wasn't making the World Cup for a couple cycles there. Think about that. And it was just, you know, it was unfortunate. They were an unfortunate casualty of the 82 World Cup format. They were eliminated without actually losing a game, which is sort of hard to even imagine. But he, you know, he did the business. He scored in the World Cup. You know, this is a guy who at 19 thought he was going to be out of the game. He was playing semi-pro. He's, you know, working a factory, playing cricket, and then cycled back and, you know, late bloomer. You may never see another story like that. You know, Jamie Vardy's the closest thing right now at the top level of soccer in England. But like the idea that he was playing for non-league Chorley and then ended up scoring the World Cup and playing, you know, for Arsenal, being the, you know, FA Cup MVP. And like, it's like, what are the odds? And it's because of the heart that he brought to the table. And then that radiated out to everything. He was so humble when he was over here. Then you'd go to England with him and you realize what he meant to everybody. Last thing I'll say, and this is not the first time I've said it, but I was in England when he passed, and I watched a game in an outdoor sort of, you know, fan zone, beer garden, whatever you want to call it. And, you know, when Gary Lineker and BBC in their pregame for the final, England-Italy, did their tribute to him, like, I needed to be, like, I was standing up, I had to, like, lean on people. My knees got weak. Like, my, you know, like I got, like the hairs on the back of my neck stood up in a way they haven't in years, because all of a sudden, like, the scope of what he meant in our sport and in that country, like it hit me. And then, like, you know, nobody knows Paul, at least in the, you know, in our little world, as you know, better than I do. Like, I've been to England with him before, going back to 2005. But like, all of a sudden to see that tribute, to have Gary Lineker, the guy who actually replaced him up front for England, you know, around 83, 84, do this like huge loving tribute, and then to open the Times of London and see a full page obituary as if you were like a head of state. You know what I mean? You know, like, and then, you know, maybe the young people don't remember him that well, but like people my age and older, that was Mariner. That's Paul Mariner. And then he came to our little soccer culture here in New England, made a life here. And then we hugged him and he hugged us right back. And it's just like one of the most beautiful things that's happened in my life. One of the great things that happened in Revolution history. And I think the club is absolutely right to honor him the way that they have, because of the sort of magic dust that he sprinkled on all of us. And I will tell you this, when I went to see him and he heard that the Reds were in first place, he was so happy. He was so happy. He could barely talk. He could barely talk the last time I saw him. And he also said that he's like, Bruce knows what he's doing. He was able to whisper that. And so take that as gospel too. You know, Bruce Arena's abilities endorsed by Paul Mariner, and the baton has been passed. And, you know, Paul Sperry will never leave us, man. He just never will. So I know I've been going on and on, but I love the guy, and he lives on. And, you know, to see what he meant to all the ex-players and staff and people around the league has been heartening and made it easier to deal with. So thanks for asking that.
No, I appreciate it. That was great. And I've never heard anyone say a bad word about Paul Mariner. I for one, I'm looking forward to his autobiography coming out in the fall. That'll be a must read. But Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we could go on all day, so we'll have to get you on again soon, because I think we got about 2/3 of our questions that we didn't get to.
Anytime. You guys only call me once every 7 or 8 years, so I'm here. You got my number, so let's do it again.